Um, the event really is a presentation from Steve Mills from Decision House. Over on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the Q&A box where you can pop your hand up and ask a question. Bernard or I will pick up those questions and pass them on to Steve. That's it from me. Over to you, Steve.
I'm just going to introduce Steve for a second. So I'm Bernard Donoghue, I'm director of ALVA. And this is just by way of context, really, before I introduce Steve Mills from Decision House. As you know, we commissioned Steve at Decision House a number of weeks ago now to undertake some visitor sentiment research into what members of the public would find reassuring when they go back to a visitor attraction, what would alarm them, what would give them greater confidence, and what are the sources of anxiety that they have in deciding to go back to a visitor attraction. It's been incredibly useful research, and we've shared it as widely as possible to benefit as many parts of the visitor attraction, tourism and cultural sector as possible, so that we all ramp up and that we're all offering a fantastic visitor experience to our visitors when they arrive. So we'll come on to that in a second. So it's been really useful to have this third wave taking account of the changes in lockdown procedures and processes and the opening up of parts of the visitor attraction economy. I just want to put a couple of things in context, and if you receive the ALVA bulletins every evening, you'll know that I've been updating you on two things in particular. One is government confirmation of opening up of visitor attractions in England from the 4th of July, and then similar announcements from the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish governments about their reopening plans too. The second is the guidance that's coming out from the UK government on visitor attractions reopening safely. We had hoped that it would be published this week, and I and a number of other trade associations have been working with government, BEIS and the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, to put together a comprehensive guide to how you can open your tourism business safely. It's been signed off by Public Health England and the Department of Culture, Media and Sport and the Department of Health and Social Care, and is currently resting somewhere in the Cabinet Office for the final sign-off from Michael Gove. We don't know why it's been delayed. It's very frustrating that it has, not least because about 20% of ALVA members have already successfully and safely opened without its benefit. So my great recommendation to you is you've probably got really detailed operational plans about reopening. Stick to them. This afternoon, I'll be sending around to everybody what the Scottish government published yesterday, and it's 99% of what the UK government will be publishing, hopefully within the next 24 hours. So that should reassure you about the kind of things that will be contained within it. But honestly, it's relatively generic and won't be as detailed as your own plans. So please plow ahead with those. The second thing that this delay has meant is that the kite mark and the industry accreditation standard that visitor attractions can use both on site and on their websites, that they are fully complying with Public Health England guidance, that they're doing the right thing, that their staff have been trained, and then they've undertaken a COVID-19 risk assessment. That's been held up too. And that's because it was Visit England's intention to launch it at the same time as the government's guidance to reopening. So again, they're just waiting for the green light from Cabinet Office, and we really hope that will happen in the next 24 hours. So I hope that's put you in the picture as to where we are, some of the frustrations that we've been feeling about the lack of guidance, and the fact that actually increasingly day by day, more visitor attractions are opening up, so that guidance becomes ever so slightly academic. But what hasn't changed is the view of the public and their own confidence building and the measures that would be required to build that confidence and to make the desire to go to a visitor attraction a fulfilled aspiration. So I'm really pleased to hand over to Steve Mills of Decision House, who's going to be taking us through the third wave of visitor sentiment research. So Steve, over to you. Very welcome.
Great, thanks Bernard, and morning to everybody. I'm just going to go through that process of sharing content first of all. Right, here we go. So yes, thanks, Bernard. So yes, it is the third wave of the public sentiment research that we're doing. So field work for this was last week, so between the 9th and the 12th of June. Just as a reminder, we're planning to run this each time that something happens that we feel might have a material impact on this sentiment. So actually, the next wave might be as soon as perhaps next week or the week after, because clearly already non-essential shops in England have already opened, and there's been various announcements this week on opening in each of the home nations. So and then hopefully this announcement on opening up the wider visitor economy that's been a bit delayed this week. So we may well be doing another wave of this next week or so. So just as a reminder of the challenge that we're facing here, so this is really all about understanding how to build trust and confidence among the attractions visiting public, and helping us to get back on our feet quickly, but also to sustain our recovery. So it's not just about getting the doors open, it's about opening and getting it right so that we maintain our reputation as both individual attractions and as a sector overall. I'm really pleased to say that there's evidence from within here, and obviously from talking to other attractions, that we are getting it right at the moment as a sector, and that's having a really beneficial effect. So a couple of major kind of questions we're trying to answer ahead of reopening. So it's number one, how do we physically present ourselves on reopening to build that trust and confidence? So everything through from the booking process to when we leave an attraction. And actually, indeed, the booking process is one of those things that we've had quite a lot of feedback on so far. And I think in the future visitor recovery benchmarking that I'm going to be talking about at the end, it's certainly one of those areas that we're going to be looking at, trying to monitor what visitors' reaction is to it. And then the second element is again about what communications messages should we put out there to build confidence and capture the public mood. So how are we generating the insights to meet that challenge? So what we've been doing is periodic waves, of which this is the third, of some online research among some large representative samples of the attractions visiting public. So by the attractions visiting public, we're meaning UK adults who visited at least one attraction in the dim and distant past of 2019. So we've done 3 waves so far. The first wave was back in the midst of lockdown in the middle of April. That gave us some initial insights. Secondly, we did the second wave between the 13th and the 18th of May, and that was in reaction really to the initial slight easing of lockdown, which took effect on the 13th of May. So that was the first time that you could go out more than once a day. What we also did at that point was there was potentially some divergence in views between the home nations, because that initial easing of lockdown didn't occur obviously as quickly in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as it did in England. So what we did was we boosted some survey responses in Wales and in Scotland to try and make sure we could have a separate look at those 2 nations. And indeed, in that first wave, the number of interviews we did in Wales was boosted up to 150, thanks to some additional funding by the Federation of Museums and Art Galleries of Wales. So we did a separate report for Wales that's available for that second wave. And then this most recent wave was conducted last week, and that was really in reaction to news about England Gardens opening on the 1st of June, which obviously took place before that we did the field work, and also news on zoos and non-essential shops opening on the 15th of June, so this past Monday. So this work was done just in advance of that, but the news was out there. And then also we did these home nations boosts again in Wales, so up to 100, and Scotland this time up to 300. And that's thanks to a consortium of Scotland's attractions who've got together and funded a boost in Scotland. So again, we'll be doing a separate report early next week that's based on Scotland, that's separate. So let's go into the findings then. So first of all, how's the public feeling about visiting attractions? So we'll start off with some context. And as I've showed this chart last time as well, so this comes from the BVA BDRC weekly tracker. And the chart here is showing confidence in the government's handling of the crisis. So what we can see here, and I've circled our waves from our attractions tracker in blue there, so you can see where they are. So you can see between that wave 1 and wave 2 here, that big drop in confidence in how the government was handling the crisis, which kicked in those initial easing of lockdown days. So that's where we saw that big dip in confidence. And frankly, I think the country just got the jitters at that point when that easing of lockdown started to happen. And then at that point, what we saw in our attractions tracker was a big drop in confidence about visiting attractions as soon as they reopened. What we've seen since then is actually confidence in the government remaining about the same. So it's still at those levels where it's about 50% confident, 50% not confident. So I think what we can safely say is that anything we see really within this presentation on attractions is not really to do with any change in how we see government confidence. That's the sort of confidence measures. The other thing that we've had a look at from the BDRC work again is how well the public is. At what stage do we see the crisis in the eyes of the public? So in red there we can see the proportion that are saying the worst is still to come, and in green the worst has passed. So again, we can see there at that second wave, that dip in the proportion feeling that the worst has passed, so that drop in confidence at this stage. And then a steady increase until we reach roughly today, so about 30% now feeling that the worst has passed. So overall, we're at pretty much the highest level in terms of feeling that the crisis has passed, which frankly is probably less to do with how we feel about the government and more to do with perhaps the public observing the trends in infection and death rates going slowly downwards. So that's a bit of context. So looking at a bit more closely at the attractions sector, what we've seen there, and again this comes from the BDRC work, is strong increases in the proportion of the population intending to visit attractions in the next 3 months. So these bottom two shaded areas down here is proportion feeling they're going to visit in the next month, and then in light blue, proportion feeling they're going to visit in the next 3 months. So again, we can see at that second wave, that big dip in confidence, and then a gradual increase from that point until where we are today. So I think that's really likely to be a combination of two things, really. Number one, I think probably most importantly, it's about news on the opening up of outdoor attractions, which is on the 23rd of May, and the subsequent opening, and then all the news around zoos and safari parks opening. I think that's what's really driven the confidence. And to an extent, to be honest, it's a bit about seasonality. So as we're moving into May, if we're looking forward 3 months and looking at intentions, that pushes us right into August at a time when you would ordinarily be expecting perhaps to visit those sorts of attractions anyway. So I think there is a little bit of seasonality in there as well, but I think it's mainly about news opening up, opening up. I say rather than any general improvement in national confidence around the crisis, because if we look at the top headline here, what we've said is it's increased for attractions at a time when intention to visit gyms and cinemas or booking accommodation actually remains quite low. So actually, if there was just a general improvement in the national confidence around the crisis affecting things, then we would expect to see improvements in things like gyms and cinemas and booking accommodation as well. I don't think it is about that. I think it's specifically around news of opening up. So I think what that's really saying is that confidence is absolutely being driven by news of reopening and the actual reopenings. So they're the triggers. So being seen in the public eye is absolutely critical in confidence building. So all the work that obviously Bernard and ALVA are doing, and all the work that you are doing as individual attractions to get into the public eye and showcase the fact that you're opening is incredibly important in building that confidence. So that increase in confidence is absolutely reflected in our survey of the attractions visiting public. So this is one of the key questions we're asking: how soon do you think it will be before you visit each of these types of attractions after they reopen? We've added a category this time, so we need to obviously recognise that there is this new dark green category, which is people who are saying, actually, I've already visited, because some attractions had already opened up at this point. But what is very clear is if you look on the right-hand side here at some of these changes versus wave 2, that there are big increases in confidence and big increases in the proportion saying, I would like to visit as soon as the opportunity arises. Now, we have to remember, of course, that we did see that big drop at wave 2 in confidence as those initial lockdown measures were eased slightly. So we're seeing increases in confidence right the way across the board here, but particularly in those outdoor attractions. So country parks and nature reserves, gardens, and in particular, I think zoos and safari parks. So zoos and safari parks went up from 12% last wave saying, I will visit as soon as I possibly can, up to 25% this wave, which is huge. And also on the right-hand side, the proportion saying, I'm unlikely to visit for a long time for zoos and safari parks has gone down by 12% this time, more than anywhere else. And I think that just really reinforces what I was just saying about the value of being in the news and how much that can really influence things. And I think the second point about that is the people on the right-hand side here in sort of that horrible pinky color is people saying unlikely to want to visit for a long time. We shouldn't write those people off. They can still be coaxed to come back. All is not lost among that group. And zoos and safari parks really emphasize that here, I think. I've also put up here in the headline, which is probably quite a nice number to have at this stage, saying 10% of the markets, so 10% of the attractions visiting markets are people who visited at some point in 2019, claim to have already visited an attraction. So that translates roughly to about 4 million adults saying that they have visited somewhere already. Candidly, at the moment, it's mainly country parks and nature reserves, some of which will be the kind of free open sites that will have been open for a while already, but also partly attractions. So we're saying about 4% of the gardens visiting market have returned already, and about 8% to country parks and nature reserves. In terms of numbers, country parks and nature reserves is around about 3 million people, and for gardens it's about 1.5 million people. So that's what we're saying, about 1.5 million adults have already returned in some way, shape or form to gardens. So hopefully that's a powerful number to start bandying around at this point. So we've talked about these early returners now. So we thought we'd have a look at who is it who is claiming to come back early. Now, I think there is a caveat on this to kick off with, is that this is obviously quite a small number of people at the moment, and within the context of this survey, it's only about 75 people we're looking at here. So we have to be a little bit careful, but it does give us some sort of idea about who is coming back early. So if we look at who's already claiming to come back, there's a couple of things going on here. Number one, something to do with age, and it tends to be the younger people who are coming back early. So among under 25s, 17% of under 25s said they have visited an attraction already, and 16% of 25 to 34s. So that's their highest. But I think what's also encouraging is that there are significant proportions even within these older age groups. And usually within this, I'd sort of lump together 55 pluses, 55 to 64s and the 65 pluses, but I've separated them out this time. And it's really encouraging to note that even among the 65 years or over group, you've got 8% who said, I've already returned somewhere. Although we have to remember that this is obviously only outdoor attractions at the moment. I think the other interesting thing is on this right-hand side, where we look at who's returned in terms of whether they are a usual frequent attraction visitor or whether they are an infrequent attraction visitor. And again, as you would expect, clearly it's the more frequent attraction visitors who are more likely to return early or have returned early already, but they're not insignificant at these lower levels already. So if we look at those who say, actually in 2019, I only visited any sort of attraction once or twice, 8% of those people have said, I've already come back to an attraction this year. So I think what we're seeing here is that there are some local people in particular who are just desperate for something different to do on a day out. It almost doesn't matter where it is. We'll see what's open, and then we'll go. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment. I've seen one or two anecdotal tweets flying around this week, saying that they are seeing lots of new people who perhaps they haven't seen before from the local area who are arriving. So I think that's very encouraging for attracting a new market in these difficult times. The other thing that I've put in here is I've looked at the difference between those with children and without children, and frankly, there isn't really anything at the moment. So whether you're a family attraction or not a family attraction, we're seeing a similar sort of early returning rate at the moment. So that's a quick look at early returners. So we've seen that younger people are more likely to be early returners. They're also likely to feel that they will return as soon as the opportunity arises. So I've had sorry, there are a lot of numbers on here, but it's quite difficult doing this as a report and also a presentation. So what we've done here is broken the return confidence down by the different types of attraction, as that seemed to be something what people wanted. And you can see from here that yes, indeed, young people are all higher numbers in terms of the likelihood to return as soon as the opportunity arises, regardless of what type of attraction it is. But again, I think encouragingly, when you look at some of the older age groups, yes, they're a bit lower, but they are still reasonably high numbers. So we shouldn't get too down if we are an attraction that has an older age profile. They are still wanting to come back as soon as the opportunity arises. I think what we've seen is perhaps older people's enthusiasm not returning quite as quickly, because if we think back to those of you who are listening in at wave one, what we were saying at that point was that actually the older age groups were the most enthusiastic. I think the enthusiasm has returned quicker among the younger age groups, but it's still there, frankly, among the older age groups as well. I'm going to go back actually and have a look at that first chart again, about how soon people think they will revisit attractions. It's exactly the same, apart from one key difference, which is on this right-hand side here, where instead of comparing to wave 2 on the easing of lockdown, I've gone right the way back and compared it to wave 1, which was in the midst of lockdown. And I think this is where it really brings out that growing gap in confidence between returning to outdoor and indoor attractions. So we can see up here how quickly or the impact of reopening on the outdoor attractions. So country parks and nature reserves, gardens and zoos and safari parks, very big increases even on that first wave in terms of those who've said, I have already come back, or I'll come back as soon as the opportunity arises. Where it's very different is down here, of course. So looking at the indoor attractions, in particular, historic houses, stately homes, palaces, and museums and art galleries. So even compared to the days in the midst of lockdown towards the end of April, confidence actually has dropped a little bit for indoor attractions. In terms of those saying, I'm unlikely to visit for a long time, actually that's seen quite significant increases. So we've seen a definite drop in confidence for those indoor attractions. And we've seen, though, that confidence comes with being in the news, especially around reopening. So I think right now what we're seeing is perhaps indoor attractions like museums and galleries, historic houses, perhaps almost in the eyes of the public being lumped in with organisations like theatres and cinemas, perhaps even. So we're seeing perhaps in the same bracket. So perhaps we now need to start focusing a little bit more on shouting about opening and how we're different to things like cinemas and theatres. How are we different? How are we opening? That's not to say no, and I think so. Perhaps there is a need to shift focus, if you like. Country parks and gardens and zoos have done an absolutely fantastic effort as a sector and individually at getting the message across, getting out into the public eye in terms of reopening, what their plans are, and actual reopening, and managing those reopenings fantastically well. But I think we're probably at the stage with those now that word of mouth will naturally spread about how well those organisations are are working, and confidence will build naturally as a result. I think we're at obviously a stage much further behind with indoor attractions, where we need to start shouting about the reopening, and hopefully the news in the next few days about their ability to reopen will prompt that. But it's going to be really important to try and push that news as far as we possibly can. And that concern about indoor attractions is really illustrated by what we're seeing here. So there's spontaneous comments around anxiety with indoor attractions and only being comfortable with outdoor attractions. So the first question we ask people in the entire survey is, tell us in your own words how you currently feel about visiting attractions once they reopen to the public. What are your hopes? What are your worries or anxieties? And these are, we let people say exactly what they want at this question. So these are spontaneous comments about comfort with only going to outdoor spaces or outdoor attractions, gardens, etc., or anxiety to do with going to indoor attractions and enclosed spaces. And you can see how that's increased as the waves have gone on. So it's reiterating what I just said, really. So now we're seeing 11%, so 1 in 10 of everybody we spoke to spontaneously mentioned something about only being comfortable with outdoor spaces, and 5% said anxiety with going to indoor spaces specifically as well. So that's really highlighting the issue that I've just been talking about. So when we're talking about indoor attractions, it's even more important to talk about safety measures that you've got in place than it is outdoors. And there's some quotes here that really illustrate that, I think. And someone up here, just to illustrate what I was talking about. So museums, state houses, whatever they are, and cinema. So this person has, again, as I've said, lumped together attractions like museums and historic houses and cinema together. But they've said, make sure there are clear guidelines on their official website to limit number of visitors, staff are wearing masks, etc. This comment down here uses the word control, and I'll come back to that later. And down here as well, bottom right, that word control appears again. Can't control how far you are from other people. Up here, control of indoor venues, including toilet facilities, will be so much more difficult. And as I said, I'll come back to that word control because I want to pick up on it again in a second. And I've said this before, but at the root of the anxiety is absolutely this. So again, this comes from the question about spontaneous comments. And this little chart here shows the proportion of the market who spontaneously mention something about social distancing when asking about visitor attractions. So that's gone up from 12% at that first wave up to 28% at this wave. So over a quarter of people are spontaneously mentioning something about social distancing around attractions. And increasingly, it's about mentions around specific concerns about fellow visitors not following the rules, or the ability to enforce that distancing. It's always been there in a few mentions, but now again, you've got 1 in 10 people saying, I can't trust my fellow members of the public, or I'm not sure about the attraction's ability to enforce distancing. So someone here saying, obviously of concern is both how the attraction will implement social distancing measures and cleansing routines, and how other people will follow the rules. There is a small part of the population who seem to feel that they are special and consequently don't need to follow the guidelines. It's imperative the attractions themselves actively police the rules so people feel safe. So again, we've seen that since the start, but it's coming out even more frequently than it has done recently. And again, down here, we all remember the Lulworth Cove pictures from a couple of weeks ago. It very much depends on how much control there is and if some behave like selfish morons. So this is referring to Durdle Door, the New Forest, everything we're seeing in the media. And again, that word control crops up here. Again, I trust the venues. It's the other visitors I don't trust. And again, someone here saying, I have concerns that other visitors will not social distance and this will not be enforced at the attractions by staff. So it's a combination of not trusting the public and, you know, how do I know that attractions have got this under control? So how can attractions reassure visitors about their ability to enforce distancing and be in control. And I think that word control is really important. So, and I think this is one way that it's really working. So as awareness grows of advanced booking, more people are referring to advanced booking as a way of limiting capacity. So visitors are increasingly mentioning advanced booking to reassure themselves that attractions have it under control. They've got it. They understand my concerns about distancing, about crowds, and about queuing. So there is an intrinsic link between advanced booking and control and your ability to control the number of visitors, and therefore reassuring visitors around crowds and distancing and queuing and all the things we know that they're really concerned about. So I think it's not only advanced booking is not only an operational tool, it's also an incredibly important communications tool for you as individual attractions as well. So I think you can use the current trends towards advanced bookings as a way of reassuring your visitors that distancing works and attractions are controlling it. So it's almost like a behavioral science thing. As soon as you say advanced booking, people immediately think, oh, that's reassured me because all my concerns about distancing are now maybe not gone away, but mitigated. So there's plenty of quotes around here that back that up. So, for example, here, I hope they open soon. I'll be happy to visit if the number of people being allowed in was controlled, for example, by ticketing. So the word control again. Concerns around queuing, overcrowding. I could have put 30, 40, 50 quotes in here that would all be equally compelling. So it's something like this, really. I'm going to wait a while before visiting these kinds of places, as I feel that people will flock to them and social distancing will not be possible. So the concept of advanced booking will counter this perception of flocking to places, because you've got it under control. You're limiting capacity. Even if, frankly, you're not limiting capacity, you have that advanced booking, and that's the trigger in people's heads. Just lastly in this section, I just want to pick up on public transport. So we asked a question about public transport last time for the first time, and confidence in using public transport. I think we've asked it again, and we'll maybe carry on tracking it as it's obviously something that's progressing. But anxiety around using all forms of public transport is still high. The numbers saying that they would use public transport in order to travel to attractions is improving. So we asked here about how they'd feel. So dark green is here, I'd be comfortable. Light green is I would be anxious, but I would still probably use. And then in pink here, I would be anxious, but would not use. So on the right hand side, we've compared it to wave 2, and it is improving slightly. So up 4% for underground, 10% for public buses. But there are still significant proportions that are feeling a little bit anxious about public transport. We've had isolated London as well, and perhaps this kind of reflects other major urban centres as well. So again, confidence has grown significantly, although as you can see on the right-hand side, there are still concern, particularly around using the underground in London. We've got to be, again, a little bit careful on base sizes here. We're only talking about 100 people that we spoke to that are in London, but confidence is certainly growing around things like public buses in London to use to go to visitor attractions. So we've looked at how the public feel. What are the practical measures that we can take to help build trust and confidence in visiting? So you'll be pleased to hear that I'm going to start talking about toilets in a second. So what should we do? What should we say? So first of all, what should we do? This is a question that we've introduced this wave, where we've said, if these facilities were closed or not available when the attraction reopened, what would you do? So we asked this among people who've said they would ordinarily use these sorts of facilities. So we stripped away the people that wouldn't use these anyway. So just looked at those who would ordinarily use each of these things. And I think what it's absolutely showing is that there is a clear demand for services, and as you can see, especially toilets, to be available on reopening. So half the market said we wouldn't visit an attraction at all if it didn't have their toilets open. So the scale here is in dark red, we've got I wouldn't visit the attraction at all. In pink, we've got I would visit, but the experience wouldn't be as good for me. And in green, I would visit, and actually there wouldn't be much of a difference. So for toilets, yeah, half have said I wouldn't visit at all. So if there are any lingering doubts about whether to open toilets or not, hopefully just have a look at this and it'll persuade you to open them. And likewise, actually, for lots of these other areas as well, I think particularly cafes, restaurants, somewhere to buy food or drink, having some sort of catering offer is incredibly important. So a fifth saying, actually, if I went to an attraction and that was closed, I wouldn't even visit. And half saying that it would impact negatively on the experience if they weren't open. So 70% saying, actually, in some way, shape or form, my experience would suffer if a catering outlet wasn't open. And it's actually quite similar for all of these areas. So over half for each of these areas would say the visit experience at least wouldn't be as good for me if these weren't available. Now, I can hear lots of you saying, yeah, but I can't get some of these things open. But I think in principle, it's important to recognise that the market would like these open if possible, clearly. And I think it's important to say, okay, if you keep things closed, then this is what happens. People start questioning, is it worth visiting? So it comes back to Bernard's comment about that they want a sanitised attraction, not a sanitised experience. So that full experience, where possible, really needs to keep going. So this really encapsulates it. So I've no worries. I just want places to open and have access to toilets and a cafe. I cannot stand this part opening with no added facilities. I like to go for the day and experience all what an attraction has to offer. And again, over here, I'd hope that the loos would be open, otherwise it would be too difficult to visit. I would like some sort of food and drink to be available. Will there be proper access to food and drink? Will there be proper access to toilets, etc.? If not, what's the point? So I think that really illustrates the issue that potential visitors will begin to question the value of the experience if we can't get some of these things open. And that's particularly the case for attractions with an older age profile, to try and open those facilities as soon as possible, especially the toilets and the catering offer here. So if we look here, I picked out some of them here. So as we saw, this is the proportion that said, I wouldn't visit if these facilities were closed. So in the market overall, 53% for toilets, but 64% among those who are age 55 or over. And it's higher for all of these areas for older. So the basic facilities, so toilets, a catering offer, and shops are even more important to older people. So those of you that have an older age profile, clearly that's a major issue for you, even more of an issue. However, of course, there remains this high anxiety around using these services at attractions, and we've seen this before. So we've got this challenge now. So they want these places open, but they are also nervous about using them. And as we've seen, so this looks at the proportion that are saying, I'll feel anxious or uncomfortable about using them more than usual when I come back. And the ones that we've just talking about in terms of really wanting them to be open, they're also the ones that people are most anxious about. So in particular, indoor cafes, toilets, interactive exhibits, and indoor events. They're the ones that are people most concerned about. And there isn't really much shift compared with the last wave in terms of anxiety. So although people are feeling more enthusiastic about coming back as soon as the opportunity arises, that anxiety is still high for the facilities that are there for indoor attractions. So when, again, as I said earlier, even more important for indoor attractions to communicate the safety measures for these areas than it is for outdoor attractions. Down here, for the outdoor attractions, we're beginning to see some drop in anxiety, particularly in the catering area. So cafes with outdoor seating and then outdoor kiosks, we're seeing a drop in anxiety, which again is really reflecting the fact that they're open and they're working well. So it shows that importance of getting it right in that real kind of quest to build confidence. If you get it right, this is the sort of impacts it can have on the entire sector. And again, we're talking about differences by age here, but anxiety around using is higher among older people for indoor facilities again. So again, it's that challenge of older people really want these facilities open, but they're also the ones that are most anxious about their use when they come back. So again, all of these areas, much more anxiety among those who are age 55 or over for the indoor attractions. So again, when those indoor attractions reopen, particularly important for older people to communicate the safety measures in place. It's less the case with outdoor attractions, definitely. So older people, more enthusiastic, if anything, but need most reassurance. I showed this chart last time, which kind of encapsulates the issue quite well. And I mentioned last time that I shouldn't show this chart towards the end of a presentation, and I've completely ignored that rule again, unfortunately. So just to explain it again, what we've got here is down this axis here, we've got the proportion who said they would ordinarily use this sort of facility. So at the top here, we've got facilities that tend to be used very frequently. And then down here, those that are used by fewer visitors. And then across the bottom here, we've got a measure of anxiety. So those who would feel more anxious or uncomfortable about using at this end, and less anxiety down here. So we typically see the indoor facilities on this right-hand side and the outdoor facilities on this left-hand side. But I think, again, what we're seeing here is an example of how important toilets and the indoor catering facilities are in terms of communication of what those safety measures are. So up here is the high use, high anxiety facilities. And we also know now that they're also the facilities that people most want open. So in terms of priority, it's absolutely up there. So toilets and catering facilities. So they need to be the priorities for attractions, not just in terms of what you actually do on site, but in terms of your pre-visit communications as well. So I suspect that the outdoor attractions that have opened have probably been inundated with queries on their toilets pre-visit. So if you've got a kind of frequently asked questions section on your website, then number one's got to be around toilets. Otherwise, you're going to be inundated with queries. And I think what we can add to that is that even more, when indoor attractions open, I think we can add the catering facilities to that list of frequently asked questions. I suspect outdoor attractions haven't seen perhaps quite as much of that because their anxiety around outdoor seating and outdoor kiosks is lower. But when indoor attractions open, we're really going to see a lot of queries around cafes and indoor catering queries there so as well. So it's not just about putting these measures in place, it's about communicating them in advance of the visit as well. And similarly with those interactive exhibits as well, people want them open and people will want to know in advance what you are actually doing to reassure them. So toilets, finally, we've asked this question first of all. So the measures being put in place by attractions around toilets are incredibly important in building confidence in their use. So we asked the question this time about how much more comfortable would each of these measures make you feel about using toilets. So whether it's staff permanently on hand to clean them, social distancing in the queue, actively managing the number of people in the queue, all of those seeing sort of 80% saying it would make me feel more comfortable, and only small proportions saying I'll be fine using without that measure. Slightly lower is about the no automatic hand dryers. So in summary there, you've got 89% of all visitors saying one of these measures would make me feel more confident. And the important figure here, I think, is only 6% said I'd be fine to use toilets without any of those measures. So you can't just open up toilets without any of these measures. I think that's when you will start getting criticism. If you just open them up without these measures in place, they are incredibly reassuring. Just a couple more charts on this. So again, this I'm not going to say too much on this. We've shown this one before, but this is looking at which of these measures would make you feel more comfortable about visiting. So we're looking here, measures that make you feel much more comfortable, a little more comfortable, would make no difference, or would make you feel less comfortable. I think the only points I really want to make here is that, again, there's not a huge amount of difference on previous waves. If there is a slight difference, it's, as I was saying earlier, the distancing measures are becoming even more important. So slight increases on some distancing measures, and slightly lower on cleanliness. So we seem to have now an obsession now about distancing. It's all about distancing and the 2 meter rule, etc. In the eyes of the public. So when we're talking about that, it's incredibly important. I think the other thing I want to point out here is, for the first time, we've added this statement about staff making sure visitors follow distancing, and that is seen as almost as important, if not as important, as the actual measures themselves. So again, it's just reiterating, don't be shy about trying to implement the distancing measures on site. Cleanliness, as I've said, we've seen a slight drop, but nothing huge. PPE is fairly similar to before. There is a little pushback, but not a huge amount. And the final point on this slide really is I changed this measure. Last time we called it notices on the website about measures on site. This time we've changed it to specifically say videos on the website showing measures in place, because I'm conscious that some attractions are putting videos on site. What we've seen is actually quite a significant drop here in terms of how that measure would make you feel more confident. So I think what I've taken from this is, we're not saying that videos don't make people feel more confident. I think what we're saying is that videos are complementary to the other information that you have on your website about the measures you have in place. Not everybody is going to want to sit through a 1 minute, 2 minute video on everything that you've got in place on site. Some people just want to know whether the toilets are open or not. And then so it will act complementary to perhaps your frequently asked questions section. And then finally, I just wanted to, one thing we've asked in the past is, what characteristics would you like to see in attractions on reopening? So how would you like attractions to behave? So what we've done here is we've asked about 8 characteristics and asked them to rank the characteristics in order. We've done some switching in and switching out of characteristics this wave. So we've added some new ones. So experience that helped me escape from reality for a while. And then also to reflect what Bernard's particularly started to talk about, and perhaps some of the wider societal issues that are going on, how much do visitors want these to be reflected? So we've added a statement about greater focus on being green or looking after the environment, and then greater efforts to engage with and reflect all sections of society. So they're new characteristics this time round. I mean, to be honest, I think what we're seeing here is that visitors are focused on the short term at present. So clearly, it's still overwhelmingly about safety and also about their own personal well-being. In the eyes of visitors at the moment, those wider societal issues are perhaps for another day. We're not saying, of course, at all that they're not important. And as a sector, we need to start talking about them and push their importance. But right now, for visitors, they are lower down in the agenda. So just to pull that together quickly in the key takeouts, I'll go through these because I've said all this already, but there has been this strong improvement in visit confidence in early June, driven by that successful opening of some outdoor attractions, and importantly, all that media coverage, particularly around zoos and safari parks. We've got about 10% of the attractions visiting market, about 4 million adults claiming that they've already opened, so visited following opening. And then those early returners are likely to be younger, but it's not just among those attractions that visit frequently. It's local people desperate for perhaps a different day out. Confidence in visiting indoor attractions has declined since the start of lockdown. Again, perhaps there needs to be a shift in focus towards those indoor attractions now and raising their profile. And the importance of implementing and communicating safety measures in those indoor environments will be even more important than it's been for the outdoor attractions. Main visit barrier is increasingly about those worries about fellow visitors adhering to distancing measures or the attraction's ability to enforce them. How can we demonstrate that? One fantastic way, I think, is this advanced booking only approach, because it indicates or implies control and limiting capacity, and that tackles all those major issues that people have around crowds, distancing and queuing. The lack of that full visitor offer is going to be a significant barrier on reopening. Visitors want to see as complete an experience as possible. Easy for me to sit here and say that. You've got to do it, but applying those appropriate safety measures is preferable to keeping the elements closed. Toilets are massively in that high priority, high anxiety, but I want them open area, and half won't visit if they're closed. But importantly, safety measures are hugely important in building that confidence. It's not just enough to open toilets with no safety measures. So it's, again, key for pre-visit communication. Indoor catering outlets and interactive elements are the two other visit experience areas generating most anxiety around use. Again, it's preferable to make those available with those mitigating areas rather than keep them closed. We've talked about anxiety around using facilities, indoor attractions being higher among older people. And then finally, visitors are perhaps more focused on the short term at present. Those wider societal issues are perhaps for another day, their view. Next steps, we're potentially going to run this again. I'll talk to Bernard after this about when that might be suitable. But again, more sections of the wider economy are opening up. We've got shops opening this week and hopefully announcements around indoor attractions opening up again soon. And then very finally, I just wanted to do a quick update on the ALVA visitor recovery benchmarking initiative that I started to talk about last time, and we've had really strong initial uptake in. So ALVA wants a launching this visitor benchmarking survey when budgets are really low and there's this need for insight and access to best practice examples. Everyone at the moment has the same questions they want to answer around these things, really. So it will be a visitor tracking survey to understand how your visitors are feeling about those new safety measures, how they're feeling about your staff, what's the impact of these measures on the core experience, as well as all the usual measures about how is visitor profile, motivations and communications triggers changing in that short term. There will be lots of changes that people want to measure, including kind of what's your geographical catchment area and how's that changing. It's going to be done as an online survey post-visit sent to visitors. So we will send you an online link that you can send out however you want to your visitors through your whatever online system you see fit. That all then comes back through an online dashboard and results are shared on a completely non-anonymized basis so we can all learn from best practice. And it's low cost. So initially £750 per attraction. But then there are some very big discounts for multiple attractions. So if you've got 4 or 5 attractions, then it's not going to be 3,000. It's more likely to be around half that amount to take part, because we want as many to take part as possible. Important to say, we've reached the point where this will definitely be going ahead. So we've got around 25 attractions committed, plus I'm talking to lots more about taking part. And a lot of people saying, well, who's in at the moment? I'm in if you're in. So people have got to commit, I guess, at this point. And it's UK wide. So we're seeing London and the regions, and some in Scotland, some in Northern Ireland taking part at the moment. We're launching it mid-July, and it will potentially actually run until Christmas, depending on demand, because I've had conversations with lots who are saying we're not opening until August, maybe even September. It's going to need to run for 2 or 3 months at least until after that. So can it run for that length of time? And I think the answer at the moment is yes. And then I've put in a link here, which I didn't put last time, which says if you're interested in that, then click on that link, and then that you can fill in a form, and then we'll be in touch with you to discuss how it can benefit you. So that's it. We've only probably left about 5 minutes for questions, I'm afraid. But I'll hand back to Bernard to take over again. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. That was fantastically useful. And what's particularly appreciated is that as the social distancing, as the release from lockdown has been happening and changes to social distancing measures and what parts of the visitor economy can open up, that's been also reflected in visitor sentiment, which is, of course, absolutely straightforward. But there are things that absolutely echo some of the things that we've been talking about over the course of the last couple of weeks. If you the pre-visit information that you have on your website is absolutely key. And we know both from European partners, but also visitor attractions here in the UK that have opened, about 90% of people who then go on to visit have read through your frequently asked, what to expect, all of the pre-visit information on your website. And you absolutely have to have information about toilets, catering. Videos have been incredibly useful to give that sort of perspective from the customer's point of view, information about pre-booking, but also information about the ability to bring your own food as well. That's been incredibly helpful. The other things that really struck me was the thing that has made people most confident is seeing other attractions attracting people. It's the visibility question. So the work of, as you were saying, Steve, the work of gardens and parks and outdoor places and zoos and safari parks in all of that celebration about safe opening has been absolutely key to making people feel that if they can do it, then I can do it too, and just boosting that confidence. What that's told me is that I need to be doing that in terms of media. So I've just done 11 BBC radio stations in the last 24 hours talking about what visiting attraction would look like and the pre-booking and all of those kind of things. So that clearly needs to happen more. And really important that people want to see staff at visitor attractions managing, policing, controlling physical distancing. Hugely important. There are actually relatively few questions. There are lots of comments saying this is absolutely right, this is our experience. Did you pick up anything? Sarah from the Association of English Cathedrals said, will requesting visitors to wear face coverings at indoor attractions reduce anxiety? Steve, did you have anything on that?
Yeah, it was in one of the charts. I didn't really pick up on it this time because I picked up on it in previous webinars there. Yeah, I think there were more than half that were saying it would make me feel more comfortable if it was compulsory to wear a mask or a face covering. We mentioned in the very first wave that there was about a quarter pushing back, saying it would make me feel uncomfortable. But in the last couple of waves, that's dropped back to sort of 10 to 15%. So you will get a little bit of pushback, but I think culturally, we are getting there. Actually, the one slide I didn't show that I skipped over was a YouGov survey, which is showing that about 20% of people in this country are routinely wearing face masks, which is way below pretty much anywhere else in the world. So it's far from being culturally ingrained. And it's in the last couple of weeks, it's reached a bit of a plateau where it's not going above 20%. So I think the answer is, in the main, it will make people feel more comfortable, but you'll get a small amount of pushback.
And I also suspect that that's also changing as a result of the new regulations about mandatory use of face masks on public transport, for example. So enforcing that will also change behaviour. I mean, I know here in my local Tesco, about 5 minutes away here in central London, I'd say about 90% of people are wearing face masks. So it does differ according to, as you were saying, the infection rate, but also the number of deaths. So yeah, that's been really interesting. Oh, one of the sorry, this is a bit of a throwaway remark, but one of the facts I absolutely loved is a big shout out to the 66% of over 65-year-olds who want to go to a theme park. That's just lovely. Good on them. Well done. Steve, anything else? Can people contact you directly if they want to participate in the recovery webinar, the recovery benchmarking?
Yeah. So as I said, on that very last slide, there's a link to a little SurveyMonkey survey, which is a form just to fill in your details, and then I'll be back in touch with people who fill that in. And I think Andy last time also put that link attached it to whatever gets sent out immediately after this, which includes the recording of the webinar, I think, and then also a copy of the presentation itself. So I think he puts the link to that there as well.
Brilliant. And what I'll do this evening in this evening's bulletin is to attach two things that people have already had, but they've come up a couple of times in the questions. One is I'll send out the guidance that the government of the Republic of Ireland issued on the safe reopening of their visitor economy, and that includes visitor attractions. So bluntly, in the absence of the UK government having published it, I'll resend the one that the Irish government sent out. I'll send out the one that the Scottish government put out last night. So you've got both of those documents. They're very, very similar, actually, because once you deal with that level of operational detail, it's all very, very familiar, reasonably similar. So do use those as templates, again, to cross-check what you've already done yourself. So I'll send those back out tonight. In addition, we'll send out this presentation to everybody who receives our bulletin as well this evening. But Steve, thank you so much again. This is, I can't tell you, well, you probably do know actually, this has been such a valuable tool for understanding the shifting change in people's sentiments and their propensity to visit. It's been incredibly helpful to visitor attractions to know how to open, when to open, what's safe, and what are the words actually, as much as the visible signs that will make people feel confident about going. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. We have one webinar next week. It's also at a slightly different time. It's next Thursday, that's the 25th of June, and it's between 4 and 5 o'clock in the evening, in the afternoon. It's a special one at a special time because we'll be hearing from 4 very senior guests from museums and galleries and theme parks in the United States of America about how they've opened up or where their plans are in terms of reopening too. So that's 4 till 5 o'clock next Thursday, the 25th of June, and we'll be sending around all of the content details for that in the bulletins and elsewhere. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Andy Povey and colleagues at Gateway Ticketing for facilitating this. It's been incredibly useful. And Steve, thanks very much again. That's been an ideal way to end the week. Thank you all very much indeed. See you again soon. Bye-bye.